Arsenal beat Chelsea 2-1 to stay 5 points clear of Man City at the top of the Premier League. And in this video, as always, we'll break down 3 key tactical tricks employed by Mikel Arteta as the Gunners went 11 unbeaten in all competitions against the Blues.
Yeah, but if you're thinking, blimey, Dino looks a bit different, that's because I've had to step into his massive shoes this week, as Dino sadly had a very nasty accident over the weekend and is currently laid up in hospital. But in true Scoggins fashion, he was sat in his A&E bed yesterday, jacked up on morphine, watching a game on his phone and still managing to text me about corner strategies, David Raya's positioning and how Saka's set up compared to what we discussed in last week's Team Talk show. Dean and I both wanted to get a show out for you guys regardless, so let's get straight into point number 1, cornerstones of success. Now, look, William Saliba described Jurrien Timber's goal, the second one for Arsenal, as beautiful after the game, right? Now, I'm not sure all football purists would quite agree with that. All 3 goals in this game, of course, came from corners. They kind of sort of cancelled each other out, didn't they? In normal play, these sides. So very much the set-piece FC tag for Arsenal, sticking well and truly. They've now got the most Premier League winning goals from corners ever with 9 of the Gunners this season, plus the most Premier League goals from corners this season out of all the teams with 16, of course. But, Kweku, there's already been more corner goals scored this season in the Premier League at 138 than last season's 135 total. So we're seeing, as Dino predicted, to be fair, at the beginning of the season, that set pieces are so much more of an important part of teams' Arsenal. Now, look, Dino said on the show last week, when talking about how your beloved Chelsea were going to defend corners, a question came in from the audience, as we do on Team Talk every week, asking whether Rossini was going to play the cat and mouse game again. Now, what that refers to, he's done it a few times when defending corners. He's leaving 3 attackers right up the other end of the pitch, therefore forcing the attacking team to have to leave a couple of defenders back to cover those off. Dino was expecting that. Jurrien Timber would have been the one, particularly when corners were taken from sort of Arsenal's right, so you're thinking Saka in-swinger, but that is absolutely not what we saw, right? For William Saliba's goal or for Jurrien Timber's goal. We'll start with Saliba's one, of course, and we'll show this on screen as usual. Now, Chelsea here, Kweku, had 11 of their own players in their own box, and it just looked off from the setup, right? You had William Saliba against Andre Santos, Gabriel up against Reece James, and then he wins the header back across goal against João Pedro. You see here from the off, Timber and Nkapie run from the back to the front. They crowd that 6-yard box. That overpowered Santos. Robert Sanchez then trips over him as he's scrambling to get to the back post. Gabriel had overpowered his 2 men, who were loads smaller than him, nodded it back across. Mamadou Sarr's positioning was all over the place, as we can see here, and Saliba nods in. So rather than freeing up space in the box, like Dino had suggested by leaving those players up there, it felt like Rossini almost played into Arsenal's hands.
Yeah, he did. And the thing is, we saw it in the semi-final second leg of the Carabao Cup. We saw we saw the kind of cat and mouse game being played, and it was very different at the Emirates on the weekend for Chelsea. And ultimately, it was a mismatch. It looked like men against boys. If you look at the size, the physicality, and how well drilled Arsenal are when it comes to attacking corners, and how kind of all over the place that Chelsea looked when it came to defending that corner, it just wasn't there for Chelsea. And in those situations, you need a dominant goalkeeper, and Robert Sanchez was far from that at the Emirates. And so Chelsea paid the price for being not just inexperienced, but ill-equipped to deal with Arsenal's threat from set pieces.
And it was the same thing for Jurrien Timber's goal as well in the second half. They didn't learn their lesson from the first half. Once again, as we can see here, 11 players in their own box. Sarr was at fault again. You see here, William Saliba and Gyökeres do that blocking duty. They're in and around the goalkeeper, making it difficult. But as we can see, it's not like they're overpowering. They're not outnumbering Chelsea in that zone. Sarr here as well is marking a man 6 inches shorter than himself in Timber. Chelsea's blockers had largely done their jobs, but Sarr, again, on a man-marking brief, he's looking at the ball, as we can see here, until the very last minute as it comes over, and then does nothing. Well, Sanchez, of course, should do better, as we can see here. That touch from Saliba, who was again being blocked by Santos, much smaller man, was absolutely minimal. And then you can see why, can't you, that Rossini said after the game, the match was lost by moments, which felt a little bit of a masked way of saying my players threw that away, because otherwise it was sort of largely even.
I'd agree with the sentiment from Rafinha, and if you look at it, you can see the frustration from the Chelsea manager. You saw it on the touchline. His team just didn't defend their box properly. If you want to win football matches, you've got to be good in the opposition's box, but you've also got to defend your box as well. And that's where Chelsea struggled. That's where Chelsea have struggled this season. But also you have to look at it from the Arsenal point of view, because they did show some defensive frailties when it came to defend their box as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously the Chelsea goal comes from that. Now, obviously we've got the Nketiah goal, which we'll have a look at. But before we look at that in a bit more detail, we've got to skip back around 3 minutes before, where Rice nearly gave away that penalty. 2 arms around the neck of Hato. He's literally manoeuvring him around in the box. How that's not a penalty, I do not know. Ball deflects off his elbow, of course, and forces Raya into making that excellent save to stop Chelsea getting the equaliser then. Now, Chelsea started a fairly normal setup, as we can see here, in that incident, that first incident, but they all converge towards the front post as James delivers that brilliant in-swinger. Arsenal players all go with them, and by the time it hits Rice, there are 15 players in total in the 6-yard box, and 13 of those are in the half of it closest to the corner taker. So Arsenal got away with that one, to be honest, and how that's a foul, like I say, I'll never know.
Especially when you look at last week and the foul on Gabriel from Kolo Muani that prevented Spurs getting that equaliser, and it would have made it a very different game and a very different title race, but we move.
Mate, double standards, we haven't got time for that. Then look, for Nketiah's own goal then, exactly the same situation for Arsenal. 15 players in total in the 6-yard box, 13 of them again basically between the near post and that front edge on the corner taker side of the 6-yard box. Total chaos, and this time Nketiah goes for the ball like Rice had done before, and it deflects off of him and in. Now, the answer to this is blockers, okay? What Arsenal made the mistake of doing was all going with all of those Chelsea players and sort of being led on by them. Chelsea players all converged from all different parts, as we saw, but rather than just running with them and being lured in, Arsenal have got to be a little bit more NFL style, changing their body positions, blocking and sort of killing the momentum a little bit. But I would expect teams to be targeting this a little bit more in Arsenal's last 9 games, and Nicolas Hover and Arteta will be working on this on the training ground this week.
So let's move on to point number 2, the Zuzu advance. There was a lot of chat before the game about who's going to start in number 10, Eze or Martin Odegaard. Eze got the start, of course, after his brilliant brace against Spurs last week in the North London derby.
Yeah, Odegaard obviously not fit as well, so it's sort of an easy choice with Eze. But one thing Dean was talking about in the build-up and why it would be important for why he would have picked Odegaard if both players were fit over Eze was less so what they do on the ball, but it was what they do off it. Odegaard, obviously famously the Arsenal press trigger. Eze, it can do that, just less sort of tactically capable as Odegaard. Arteta trusts Odegaard an awful lot. Now, the interesting thing though, as far as the press goes, is that it was actually Martin Zubimendi who made them tick. Now, before the game, Zubimendi had covered the most ground of any player in the Premier League, right? Which may be surprising for some non-Arsenal fans who think of him as just a holding midfield player. But he put that engine to good use on Sunday. Dino spoke before about how like jump men are employed by some Premier League teams. Yeah, Luke Shaw done it for Manchester United against Newcastle, De Ligt against Chelsea, Fabian Schär done it against Arsenal for Newcastle as well. It is more extreme when centre-backs do it. It's basically where players are given licence to totally jump out of the position they usually play and just follow a player all the way around the pitch. It looks weird when centre-backs do it, but that's exactly what Zubimendi was doing in this game. Dino had mentioned in team talk about how Chelsea like to play out from the back by inviting pressure on and then sucking players into central areas and then playing sort of risky passes to spring out and then feed their number 10s who hopefully are in a bit more space which has been vacated by those players that have been dragged out. That's the theory anyway. But look, as we'll show on screen here, to combat that, Arsenal's front 3 in the press playing very, very narrow, and rather than committing to that ultra high press when Chelsea were doing their classic thing, Sanchez puts his foot on the ball, the 2 centre-backs split wide, rather than being lured into that, they just sort of, they let them have the ball deep. They didn't push right on. But at the same time as that, Zubimendi was that jump man, sticking to Enzo Fernandez or whoever else from Chelsea dropped deep from midfield to try and pick up that ball, sticking to him like glue. And that meant that Chelsea were forced to go long, or as we saw on a couple of occasions in the early stages of that first half, they try and play out from the back, and then only once Sanchez has played that pass do Arsenal spring that high-level press with the front 3. So it just And then we saw Sanchez put under loads of pressure, right? And nearly concede early doors. There was less of a trigger thing, and it was more Zubimendi just shadows the players coming out of midfield, and the front three just almost invite Chelsea to do one of two things, both of which they're quite uncomfortable with, which is either play around with their centre-backs or launch it line. And that's one of the main reasons, really, why Chelsea were largely limited to sort of very few chances from open play.
Exactly that, mate. Chelsea looked toothless in that aspect. But let's move on to point number 3. Hip Raya, and Arsenal shot stopper. He came to the fore at the Emirates. He was absolutely brilliant for Arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Look, it was St David's Day on Sunday, wasn't it? Peter Drury on Sky anointed him the patron saint of goalkeeping.
I like that.
Yeah, and how right he was for the Arsenal fans, right? Absolutely superb performance. Look, we'll show his past stats here. First of all, with his distribution, as always, absolutely on point, right? 64% of his 25 attempted passes completed successfully. He also launched a couple of quick counter-attacks with those long and accurate throws of his a couple of times. That forced Chelsea into those sort of cynical fouls, one of which I think saw Cole Palmer booked. And then, as you've kind of alluded to already, if you compare his robust defence of his goal when defending corners to Robert Sanchez's approach, it's like totally night and day, isn't it? But we must focus on those match-winning saves. Firstly, to stop the deflection off Declan Rice's elbow, right? He wasn't to know whether or not it was a foul. He's got to have his wits about him, even though Rice was up there playing WWE with Hato. Raya also does some wrestling of his own, right? He's stuck in an absolute melee of players, and from a very, very unnatural position indeed. He shows unbelievable athleticism to dive back towards his goal and then tip the ball over. One that showed like a save there that showed proper heart and commitment and grit and desire, as much as any real sort of goalkeeping technique. Whereas we can see here, the one that everyone's sort of remembering, when he tips Garnacho's cross round the post with just 4 minutes to go at the end of the game, pretty much the rescue or save, hold on to those 3 points of Arsenal. That was an example of absolutely perfect technical goalkeeping. He positioned himself perfectly, as we can see here, set his feet so he could go either way, depending on where the ball went. Once it had hit the on-rushing João Pedro or even one of the defenders, or just bounced and he didn't know where it was going to go. No one watching knew where it was going to go. And then he shows unreal power and reactions to tip that round the post.
And that's why, for me, he was Arsenal's man in the match. And even the save that he made at the death, the João Pedro overhead kick that kind of led to the Liam disallowed goal, he didn't know it was offside. And the fact that he's there always for his team, making crucial saves, is why he's one of the best keepers in the league.
Mate, exactly that. And if they win the title, Arsenal fans are going to have that man there to thank as much as any of their other players. Look, honourable mentions do go to Jurriën Timber, Victor Gyökeres, and definitely Reece James, who was the standout performer for Chelsea. But the ultimate honourable mention, of course, goes to Dino. He's having a very, very rough time indeed at the moment. We know you guys love him. We love him in this building over here. Knowing him as I do, he will 100% be watching this. So we send our love, Dino. All of you lot, send Dino some love in the comments. I hope this was acceptable enough as a stand-in, the massive Scoggins shoes to fill, but he will be back sooner rather than later. He'll be chomping at the bit to get back. Whether it's for Team Talk this week, I don't know, but we will still be here for that. So stick with Tactics Exposed. Tell Dino how much you love him in the comments and on his socials at Dino Decides, and we'll see you next time.